Anglo-Aryan. Thoroughbred and Arabian.
I remember, and I will pass it on.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
Ronald Reagan, the greatest president of the 20th century. You and I believe that, but what will future generations believe about this remarkable man?
Constitution of the United States.
They expect you to tell your children that the American people no longer have the will to cope with their problems, that the future will be one of sacrifice and few opportunities. My fellow citizens, I utterly reject that view. We're not, as some would have us believe, doomed to an inevitable decline. I do not believe in a fate that will fall on us no matter what we do. I do believe in a fate that will fall on us if we do nothing.
What a man. We laughed with him, wept with him, rejoiced with him. We saw him bring strength, prosperity, and pride back to America.
Proud to know you.
Proud to know you too, sir.
In short, we saw a president with humility, honesty, and commitment to principle set out to change a nation and end up changing the world.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
If our children, our grandchildren could meet this man, they'd understand Ronald Reagan and learn what greatness is. I'm Charlton Heston. I want to talk to you about making history, American history, and about having your name linked with the legacy of Ronald Reagan's life, his leadership.
Reagan was the leader of the West when the West meant freedom. So he was the leader of the quote-unquote freedom fighters of the G7 and the rest of the world. And we achieved most of that agenda, not all, but most of it under his leadership. And you had the sense at that time, when you were dealing with Reagan, that you were having a conversation with history.
You see, there is a place where our great-great-great-grandchildren will be able to meet President Ronald Reagan and understand his heart and soul. It's the place he loved the most, the place he and his wife Nancy called Rancho del Cielo, the ranch in the sky near Santa Barbara, California. Their home since 1974 when he was governor of California. Here's the one place on earth to meet the man, Ronald Reagan.
When that gate opens up at the bottom of the hill, and I start coming up, I start seeing Dad. I start really feeling he's like right around the next corner. And when I come through the gate of the ranch and actually come down and see the house, you almost like envision him really standing out there in the middle of this field, in the middle of the ranch, just looking around and just feeling how lucky he is. And I'm feeling lucky that I'm going to be able to spend the afternoon, spend the day with him. And I just see him in every part of this ranch, but his presence is so much here. It's an amazing feeling, because even today, coming up for this, coming through that gate and seeing the house, I almost felt like when I came to the front door, he was going to be at the front door to welcome me in, like he used to be. He's got his mark on it, and it'll never leave.
Early on in the administration, when the president called me into the Oval Office, and when I got there, he was sitting there with the 3-month schedule, and he looked at me and said, "You know, Mike, there's no time for the ranch on this schedule." He smiled, looked at me, and he said, "You know, you can tell me just about anything, and I'll probably do it, but you're not going to tell me when I'm going to go to that ranch." He said, "I happen to think the more I go to that ranch, the longer I'm going to live. So we're going to go to the ranch." I couldn't argue with that.
If there was anything that meant a lot to him personally, it was the ranch. And it gave him a good opportunity to do some in-depth thinking himself, so that when he did come back with the rest of us, either to meet with us down at our headquarters in Santa Barbara, or when we got back to Washington, he would be fresh with a lot of ideas and have his own thoughts about what ought to be done.
The president referred to it as his open cathedral. We on the cabinet knew it only as the Western White House, and work as usual.
The ranch, I thought, symbolized a lot of America to him, and its potential and its splendor. And he worked it every day and loved it every minute. He was in fabulous physical shape. When you held Ronald Reagan's arm, you were dealing with absolute steel. But this is what he loved to do, because it kind of brought him close to his version of America, what America was. The strength and the capacity to grow, and the clarity that you had from the top of the mountain, the brilliance of the landscape and the horizons, east and west.
He could find peace here away from the turmoil of being the president. And here he gathered strength. I really do think without the ranch, you don't have the Ronald Reagan that we all know and all love. This is where he really garnered his strength from to go on. And because he could come out here and just be at peace with it, at one with all of the surroundings. And I think that's what we all saw out here, that we could be, here we could be a family. We could be away from the spotlights and just be us.
When President Reagan was there, a rustic ranch on a California hilltop was transformed into the nerve center for the most powerful nation on earth. It was at the ranch that he signed the Economic Recovery Act, the largest tax cut in American history. It was here that President and Mrs. Reagan hosted Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, Margaret Thatcher, Mikhail and Raisa Gorbachev, and other world leaders.
When President Reagan gave President Gorbachev that felt cowboy hat, he just took it naturally and stuck it on. Well, it was backwards. And I went over to the staff and I said, that hat's on backwards. It is? Yes. And he's smiling for the cameras. And I know the people that are going to say, he's got it on back. And I didn't want to embarrass Mr. Gorbachev. I said, should we stop and turn it around? And they just let it go. And he was sitting there like this, but the hat was on backwards.
Ronald Reagan was at ease among world leaders, but he didn't need the trappings of high office. He lived very simply at the ranch, much of which he built with his own hands.
Very scientific business.
We sit in a room right now that my dad built. I think it's important for people to see that. Here was this man that did it himself. Didn't ask others to do it for him, but did himself, who was a builder of a house, a builder of a ranch, a builder of relationships, a person who indeed just exuded all of these things. And if you take the ranch away, all they know is the presidency. That's all they know. They know he was president of the United States. They have no other frame of reference for my father. And my father would tell you, if he was sitting here, he would look at you and he would go on and tell you, this is where he got his strength.
How much will you take for the place?
Oh, you can't sell heaven.
This is what gave him the strength and the power and the reserve to go fight the battles on Capitol Hill, fight the battles of the world, and change the world. Without this, the wall still stands.
I was lucky enough to go up to the ranch with President Reagan on several occasions, and that's what he loved, and he loved to clear brush. But that was him, and he was riding his horse around. He used to say, there's nothing better for the inside of a man than the outside of a horse, and all of that spirit is there at the ranch, and it captured the American part of Ronald Reagan, and I think it's important that people have a chance to share that.
His richness of spirit came from values like hard work, honesty, devotion. One example of his cherished values can still be seen at the ranch at a place called Heart Rock. Here the president carved his initials and those of the love of his life, Nancy. That's what makes the Reagan Ranch such a treasure. It's a window into the life and character of Ronald Reagan and the traditional values he cherished.
This is how it is. This is how he made it. And it's like he could show up right now and we could go riding. This was him, the common man who could relate to presidents, kings, and queens and make them listen. But he was a common person, thoughtful, down to earth. He meant what he said and said what he meant. This is the epitome of who Ronald Reagan was.
What a shame if Rancho del Cielo had been lost to future generations, and it almost was. When it first came up for sale, unlike other presidential properties, the Clinton administration refused to protect it. The California Assembly also failed to act.
Well, the ranch of Ronald Reagan is in many ways reflective of him personally, of his character and personality, just as in many ways Monticello reflects Thomas Jefferson, or Mount Vernon reflects George Washington, places that both of those presidents loved very much and which reflects their personality in so many aspects.
Finally, just as a wealthy Democrat was about to buy the ranch and change it forever, the Young America's Foundation stepped in. Ron Robinson and his board risked everything to raise a down payment, incurring a huge debt but saving the ranch.
This is the site we had to protect. There's no other place that has the significance for the conservative movement as this ranch does. Reagan plotted his plan to get elected as president there, and to him it was the very symbol of individual freedom that is so treasured by conservatives. So this is a site that we just absolutely have to protect.
I think the preservation cause is sacred because it's about not only places, but it's about ideas and values. And there's absolutely no substitute for being where Jefferson lived, for being where the Reagans lived, to understand their vision for this country.
And I think it's particularly important that we save the homes of our modern presidents, let history take its course, because I think we're going to find that people like Ronald Reagan, 50 years from now and 100 years from now, are looked upon as the George Washington, perhaps, of their generations. And they may easily get the 1 million people a year that we welcome today. It's a very, very thrilling thing to think that Americans will always have these places to go back to.
Today, a rustic ranch in the California hills stands quietly waiting to share the legacy of the last lion of the 20th century. But to appreciate that legacy, we need to remember what things were like when Ronald Reagan became our 48th president.
The inflation was at 18%, 19%. Interest rates were double-digit. There were gas lines.
We had the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression of the 1930s.
This was the Brezhnev period, the height of the Cold War.
Helicopters were falling apart in the desert. We had no military capabilities. The country was not respected.
And then perhaps equally serious was the spirit of the American people. President Reagan's predecessor had called it a malaise that the people were in. Ronald Reagan said the malaise was not with the people, it was with the leadership. And then he went on to prove that that was true, that by his leadership he revived, I think, the spirit of the American people.
Ronald Reagan's leadership was rooted in character and guided by principle, not by polls. This must be passed on to future generations. Yet today, that legacy is under attack. Liberal politicians, professors, and media pundits are rewriting history, discrediting President Reagan and his achievements. They've labeled the Reagan years the decade of greed. They've called Ronald Reagan a cheerleader for selfishness. They've blamed him for everything from cracked babies to the spread of AIDS. But by trying to destroy a great man's example, what they're really doing is robbing future generations of their heritage. That's why we must preserve now the one place that speaks most powerfully about his life and legacy, the Reagan Ranch. Thousands of young people will come here to be inspired by the president's example, his way of life,
Well, what we've got to do is make sure that young people can still hear our view, which is that Ronald Reagan is the greatest president of the 20th century. We want them to know the truth, and we're going to make sure that we shout the truth loud and clear.
There's always the chance that people will just remember Ronald Reagan as a successful president, but not realize that he was for limited government, individual freedom, and a strong national defense. And we want to make sure that those principles are continuously conveyed to young people in this country.
They'll also meet the conservative giants of our day there and be trained in the principles and values that made Reagan a great leader and America a great nation. That's why President and Mrs. Reagan were so thrilled when Young America's Foundation purchased the ranch. The president has been closely involved with the foundation for over 20 years.
When Ronald Reagan was president, I was a student in the Young America's Foundation programs. I traveled to the White House, one of the many occasions when he hosted Young America's Foundation students.
Each year after my election in 1980, we hosted Young America's Foundation at the White House. Together we worked to accomplish much of what has come to be known as the Reagan Revolution. Much has been achieved since Young America's Foundation's first conferences in 1979 and 1980.
He was all about educating young people, and that's what Young America's Foundation is all about, helping the next generation understand these ideas of freedom.
Well, it's important for us to let the young people know that there was not just a personality named Ronald Reagan, but a set of ideas that this man believed in that worked and made the country better. And in the future, young people are going to face the same kind of challenges. They happen, you know, there's no generation that's not going to be faced with very serious challenges. Understanding Ronald Reagan's ideas, understanding how he coped with the challenges of America in his day will help these future generations cope with their challenges tomorrow.
Every generation needs to learn the lessons over and over and over again. So in no small way, studying the Reagan tax cuts of 81 and 82 will not only be a reminder, but will be a refresher course in incentive-oriented economics.
Ronald Reagan always considered young people both as governor and then later as president of the United States as a very important audience. That's why he worked with Young America's Foundation. That's why he hosted us every year of his presidency at the White House.
Why at the ranch? Well, President Reagan's biographer, Edmund Morris, said it well. Go to the ranch. That's where you'll find his soul.
This is Ronald Reagan. This is the humble servant who served his country and became president of the United States of America. And this is where he truly relaxed, where he could get up in the morning, go out and chop wood and ride horses in the afternoon, and you just look at the beauty. It's unbelievable. He loved it so much. Look over my shoulder, would you please? How do you not save that? I mean, how do you really not save that? It truly is my dad's legacy. He would be ecstatic at what, in fact, you all are doing with the ranch, and what it would mean to him would be so much. And Young America's Foundation, by taking over the ranch and using it in that kind of a positive way to uplift my father and uplift the family, does a great service to my father, does a great service to his legacy, and does even a bigger service to the young people that maybe there's out of that group, maybe there'll be another president someday.
If there was anything that meant a lot to him personally, it was the ranch. And so therefore, for anyone who is a Reagan fan or who feels a debt of gratitude to Ronald Reagan, I think an investment in Young America's Foundation program for continuing and expanding the role of the Reagan Ranch as a part of American history is a tremendously good investment.
If you loved Ronald Reagan, if you respected what he did, if you admired what he stood for, then this is the place to say thanks, right here.
As a member of the Reagan Ranch, your name will be permanently engraved on Freedom Wall, be seen by all future visitors. With a larger gift, your name will be listed on the permanent map of the Reagan Ranch. The specific acreage you helped preserve will be marked in your name. For more information, please review the materials enclosed with this video. Then, let your heart guide you as you decide what you can do for this great man. The task is urgent. As President Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. But he also said, there is a flickering spark in all of us, which if struck at just the right age can light up the rest of our lives. We want that spark to catch fire in the hearts and minds of young Americans who will be inspired to become America's next Ronald Reagans.
I remember a man who was more than he seemed, much more than a face on the silver screen. And I remember a man who broke down walls by the strength of what he believed.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
We will always remember. We will always be proud. We will always be prepared, so we may be always free.
Yes, you and I saw greatness walk our land. We'll never forget him or be able to thank him enough. But we can save and forever protect the one place closest to his heart. We can open its doors and share his shining legacy with those who follow us. By doing that, we can say, thank you, Ronald Reagan. Thank you for reminding us of the greatness of our country, America. Thank you, and God bless you for making us proud again.